All right, I think we're live. Good afternoon, community. Welcome to our third official Cara Office Hours session with training. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Sara Rahim, and I am your resident Cara Plus friend and frequent facilitator. Today, I am pleased to have on screen with me Joycee Black, who is a training specialist manager here at the Cara Collective.
Good afternoon, community. For those who do not know me, my name is Joycee Black. I've been at Cara for 3 years. And as Sara has already said, I'm a training specialist manager, and I've been in this position for 2.
Thanks, Joycee. So for those of you who are new, our virtual office hours came to life as an opportunity to really create spaces for workforce practitioners to come together, to workshop, obviously, share pain points and learnings. But I think even more importantly, just to acknowledge, sometimes this stuff can be hard, right? And there's value in connecting and talking to folks who are doing it alongside with you. So while I typically hold these office hours in a Zoom-like call, today we're testing out a live streaming format. So for those of you who are tuning in, I would like to call out the handy dandy comment section. So I believe you are welcome to drop in your questions and comments in the YouTube section, and we'll do our best to answer them in real time. So each month we host a variety of new topics. And again, today we'll be diving into Cara's socio-emotional and professional skills training. Before we begin, we'll take a couple of minutes to talk through Cara's model for more context. So I'll pull up a quick slide. For those of you who probably know, Cara is a 30-year-old workforce development organization. We run social enterprises and training boot camps, and over the past 3 decades, we have helped people experiencing poverty move into nearly 12,000 jobs. We'll head over to the next slide. So a few years ago, we asked ourselves, could we take all that we've learned after operating in Chicago for 30 years and share our best practices and best failures to other practitioners and organizations who were also working to get folks into gainful employment? And thus, Cara Plus was born, which is our national expansion team. Through Cara Plus, we partner with organizations that prepare talent for the workforce. And most recently, we have started working with employers who are interested in attracting, hiring, and cultivating exceptional overlooked talent. Over the past 2 decades, 2 years through Cara Plus, we have engaged over 20 organizations around the country through our affiliate model and through our workforce development institutes. So moving on, I'm going to quickly highlight Cara is all about our values. I reference these values on the screen: motivation, affirmation, community, structure, and intentionality, because these really reinforce what helps shape and inform our Cara community, whether we are meeting in person with our participants or doing things in a digital world. These values are also woven throughout our service delivery model, which I will quickly touch base on. So on this slide, you'll see an image of our service delivery model, which is really just the journey through which we engage participants as they work towards gainful employment. So we'll be zooming into training in just a minute. But I often get asked, how does Cara's model work? And we say this all the time, right? It's more than just getting the job, it's keeping the job, which means we focus on both the personal and professional. And that's represented here in this model that you see. We operate using a simulated workplace environment. So, whether you're coming into a direct transitional job or into our training, training happens in 2 ways. The first is our programming, right? So that's our traditional classes and coaching. And training also happens through our true social enterprises. So the third thing that we do is we place, as we recognize everyone is on their own unique journey when they are admitted into Cara. So once folks have demonstrated our 5 workplace competencies, they're really given time with our job placement team, who work closely with over 70 employment partners in Chicago to create that best fit job match, which you see right there in the placement section. And the final thing that we do is we retain and we grow. So once you have that job, we want to make sure that you can stick and stay and grow. So at Cara, you don't technically graduate once you land the job. You graduate when you hit 1 year at that same firm. So our coaches and staff are working closely alongside our participants who are employed to really hit to that 1 year. So now I'll zoom into our training piece, which is really that leadership wheel you see. This houses all of our portals. So again, regardless of where you're entering, whether you're coming into our full-time classic model, whether you are kind of working through our a la carte workshop model, or whether you are going straight into transitional employment through our 2 social enterprises, leadership training is really rooted in the same values that I mentioned, along with our 5 transformations, which make up our socioemotional skills training. So we'll move to the last slide, which houses our 5 concepts of transformation. So again, these are phrases that make up the foundation and concepts of all of our training. So we have look with new eyes, change your behavior, don't relax, think outside the box, and know the deepest truth of who you are. This might sound like a foreign language. I'm going to pause here and throw this over to Joycee. Joycee, in a nutshell, can you kind of tell us what does transformations mean to you?
So transformations for me is a bit personal as well as a bit professional. We truly believe, or I truly believe, that there's no 2 people. And you may often hear people say, oh, I'm not like that at work. I'm a totally different person. Or at home, no, I don't act like that at home. I don't take my work home. But in all truth, they blend. Sometimes they overlap and they bleed. And so transformations is being able to look at both pieces of your personality, your persona, or your life, your personal and your professional, and combine the 2 and find out how they are impacting each other. And then saying, what's new for me? Not necessarily what do I need to change. It might be something that I need to improve. It may be a habit or a behavior that I need to get rid of and replace. But either way, that's what that transformation will look like, is being able to look at all of you and say, I'm ready for whatever is to come to make and get the best of who I am. So that would be the transformation, the whole you, not just one half.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll dive into some of those concepts in a second, but let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about training at Cara, right? Maybe in a pre-COVID world, what did training look like? I had referenced there was a classic model and a workshop model. What does the team structure look like, and how was training running before, let's say before March 2020?
Okay. So in the training department, you have 5 trainers. You have a manager of curriculum that is one of those trainers, and then you have a director. You before 2020, you had 3 specialists, including myself. And so we had specialties. You had people that could really dive into that transformations piece. All of the trainings have the transformations, but you have those 5 that Sara previously mentioned, where you really are building on that personal piece. And so the idea was to have the same trainer in that space so that they could build that rapport, as well as learn the participants. The participants can trust that trainer, and that trainer can help them through that process of transforming. And so that would take place in your 4-week training. It was every Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 o'clock. And you had 2 sessions a day. And so we talked about your 5 workplace competencies in there, your communication, your time management, your team building, your conflict management, your professionalism. And then in your workshop space, they were more of an a la carte, and they were for our participants that could not commit to the 4-week training. So they may have already had a job. And so they're looking to improve that position, learn some skills to be promoted. We're looking for something totally different. And so in that space, you would come in the afternoon. And so those workshops went typically 1 to 4, or you have one in the morning that will go from 9 to 12, where participants can come in and they can get some of those resources, some of that training, build that community, get that support, and use it on the job they're currently in, or to seek a new job.
Awesome. So, I'm putting myself in the shoes of a job seeker, right? Let's say I've been out of work for a while. I've heard great things about Cara. I show up wanting to get that paycheck. Like, how do you convince someone that, taking time to work on not just the professional stuff, but the socio-emotional stuff is important? Like, we have classes called love and forgiveness. Why is that important? And how do, our participants bought into it, or what does that journey look like?
Absolutely. And to your point, in the beginning, we hear a lot of that. What does this have to do with a job? I just came to get a job, and you want me to do love, like you said, love and forgiveness? who cares about love and forgiveness? And so we always say something you will frequently hear a trainer say: anyone can get a job. Not everyone can keep a job. Mm-hmm. And so in those love and forgiveness and those other workshops, we're working with our participants to keep the job, to get to that 1 year plus, to get those advancements. And so, for example, in love and forgiveness, we talk about a lot of the things that come up in the workplace that may trigger us, right? Some of that conflict management that we just haven't dealt with yet, where we just walk away or we blow up and we just say, it's okay, I'll get another job. And that's eventually becomes a pattern. And so ideally in transformation, we start talking through these things. We start touching on some of those things that might be a little tender, right? We're like, oh, that wound's not quite healed yet. But the idea is now you don't have to heal that wound alone. You're healing that wound in a community of people. You're getting a ton of people that probably have the same wound. It might not be on their arm, it may be on their knee. Right. But the idea is that we're going to all get this healing together. You now have a support system that will leave with you. In the cohort model, they do every single thing together. That 8 to 5 is the same people. There isn't a new person that can come in week 2. Right. So you see all of it together. You see people unfold together, and then you're together to help build each other up. We have something called a community tree where we make sure that they reach out to each other days and nights, and you see real friendships bond, and you hear years later after people have made Great Wall and been promoted, like, that's my best friend. You know, we've been friends since I came through Cara in the 90s. And so that's the idea. It's that it's not just about job training as we think, like you go in, you get some information and you move out. It's about internalizing some of that information and seeing how it applies to yourself, and then using it for yourself to improve whatever situation in your personal and professional life.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, you know, as a Cara staff member, I, in my first 6 months, sat through every single transformations class in person during the classic cohorts. And I can definitely attest to the fact that regardless of where you're coming in from, right, whether you are re-entering after having served time, or whether you are a mom or a former CEO, or just, someone who's graduated out of high school or working towards your GED, it doesn't matter what part of the journey you are on, there is still value to pulling up, right, and dealing with some of that ish that's inside of you to get that job, right? Whether it's imposter syndrome, or whether it's realizing that there is something deeper there that's preventing you to commit or be punctual, or not to be able to believe in yourself, right? So I definitely believe in the power of seeing that transformation in person. So let's just address the main thing, like COVID-19, right? Yes. The pandemic happened a year ago, stuff shut down. So with Cara, running a classic model or even running workshops in person, walk me through what happened in March 2020. Obviously, we received a shelter-in-place order, and the entire organization, we paused. We went straight to work from home. So what conversations were happening in the training team?
So first thing in March, we were like, okay, this isn't going to last long. So that was our original thinking. This isn't going to take too long. We're going to be back in the office in no time. And then we started to learn, like, no, this is looking a little longer than we expected. So our minds went straight to the participants. How do we engage our participants in the same way that we were engaging them before? So this is my panic voice. What do we do? How do we jump back in? How do we dive? Like, we just got to do it. We got to get back in, and we got to just get there. And so we started to create tons of curriculum. And we were like, how do we get this virtual? We got to do videos. We got to do it. And so we were having multiple meetings in a week, and we were just like, this is what we're going to do. And we're just creating. And after creating a ton, we still weren't seeing participants really getting the information, right? So we were putting her out there, and they were like, okay, now what do I do with this? And so we had to take a step back, and we had to look at what we were doing, and we had to not look from a training perspective where we're like, we need to provide this information, but looking for from a participant's perspective of what do you need? What does a participant need in this space? This is a very unusual space for everyone. This is something no one has ever experienced, which is creating all different types of situations. And then it being COVID and taking multiple lives in families, we had to then consider that. So our step back was, how do we meet participants where they are? That transitioned from just wanting to throw out information to now taking in information. So we started asking participants, do you have access are you even in the space? Like, is your mind even in the space right now to come into this workshop and really get what you come to this workshop for? And so we learned a lot. We learned that some of our participants had a landline, and maybe not even that, based on where they reside. We learned that there were some participants that can take your computer, take it apart, and put it back together and work it smooth as ever. And so figuring out now what that looks like for training, so that we can meet the needs of all of those participants. And so we transitioned to our platform virtually, which was Ring Central. And as we started to tailor our trainings, we made them where the person on the phone could experience it just as that person that can take down that computer and rebuild it. So rather you could see the screen or not, as long as you can call in and get on that line, we were promising that we were going to provide you all the content. And so making sure that as a trainer, so we had to as a training department, say, how do we best do this and create that participant experience? So we made sure that the slides were something that can be discussed, where there can be dialogue. We made sure that we were checking in with those persons on the phone, like any questions there, and making sure that they felt engaged. And then what we did was we learned that that was a lot for one person. So not just one person could do that. So we split it where there was always a conductor on the line, which would be another training person. We worked with solutions to learn a lot more about Ring Central's in and outs. And then once we did that, now the conductor, that's the person behind the scenes that's paying attention to the mute buttons, paying attention to the questions in the chat, paying attention to each other person's screens. They're doing maybe some tech support behind the scenes. If a person's calling a hotline, like I'm trying to get in, but I can't. And so they're having that conversation, helping people get in, and also letting the trainer know, hey, you have a person trying to get in. They are communicating, because again, we're still assessing competencies. And so you being able to reach out and have that conversation and really try is a competency. So we're also assessing in the same space. So it may have been a little troublesome for a participant to get in and navigate, but we're silver lining. We're still using all these things for the benefits of the 5 workplace competencies in other ways. So it was all about learning. We were learning together. How do we make this work in a virtual world?
Yeah, for sure. There's so much there that I want to unpack, I guess, starting with, you definitely mentioned a few trends that I feel like I've heard other nonprofits and organizations talk about, especially during Institute, right? Where we're coming together and we're workshopping. The first you mentioned was, I think, something a lot of organizations around the country had to pause and just be like, how do we meet participants where they're at, right? So again, Cara's coaches, they were kind of like the first line responders, right? Just connecting with people, saying, what is most important to you right now? Are you being furloughed? Do you need support with financial relief or financial assistance? I'm sure people saw themselves having to work from home and need childcare or support that in that way. So part of that was also acknowledging, hey, maybe a job training program like Cara is it's not the best time for you to do this right now, right? So it sounds like that was also some conversations we were having at that time, like maybe you just need to take a pause and re-engage with us when you're ready. And then I think the next thing I learned, or at least from what I'm hearing from you saying other folks, is maybe quickly realizing and accepting that like we can't do it all, right? Because I think immediately when things shut down, there was this immediate urge to say, how do we do all of this and flip it? And some people were able to do that pretty quickly. Again, like one of our affiliates, LSI Works, they've done some really great digital work. And I think at Cara, it wasn't this, like, we had to acknowledge we had a different context, a different service delivery. And part of it was, yeah, like you said, having to think through the pieces of, hey, before we deliver a curriculum virtually, maybe we need to zoom out and first ask ourselves, do like our participants even have access to this, right? So I'm going to tie this back to one of the transformations, which is like thinking outside the box, right? So would love to hear from you a little bit more about what does that like digital equity journey look like, right? Like what conversations did we have at that time before we even started delivering curriculum, when we had to kind of assess the tech needs or capacity of our participants?
Mm-hmm. So we tried a few things up front. One of the first things, and I feel like it's ancient times now, but one of the first things we had were like training referrals. And it was where departments could send a referral for a participant so that they can get one-on-one coaching on maybe a few competencies or one competency to help them improve it. But that became a longer process for that person to get that competency checked off, because I would be saying, here's a task or an assignment, go take care of that assignment and then check in with me in 2 weeks. And if you don't do the assignment in 2 weeks, now it's, okay, here's an extension, here's another week or two. And so then it was, that was a cycle that may become a cycle for a few people for longer than needed. Where if it was an ongoing process, their competency, it was more consistent. It was more a muscle being built versus work on the muscle and then you disappear and then you work on the muscle again. Mm-hmm. And so as time went forward, we said, okay, now what do our participants need in another sense where we can coach them ongoing? Mm-hmm. And so once we got into this virtual setting, we started to look at ways where, and even as professionals, we had to transition in this new time. So for example, now everyone's living room is their office, or their office is right around the corner. So there's no more traffic, right? You can make your coffee, you can make your lunch, it's all right there. But that also comes with everything else in your life, right? Pets and family and anyone else in your space. And so navigating that became a part of maybe your conflict management, or it was a part of your professionalism or your communication of saying, hey, I can't be on screen right now because I'm taking care of something personal. I'll be on in the next 15 minutes and then holding up to that. Or are you having a conversation with your family that you may have never had before? Like, hey, I need a little silence, right? Mm-hmm. They might give you a side eye, but are you able to uphold that because you understand? And then are you on time, right? Because we, again, are right around the corner from our jobs now. Everyone's right around the corner. Are you logging in right on time? Are you logging in late because you thought it was just a button and then, your computer completely rebooted? And now you're in a space where you're 30 minutes late to your appointment. So that was a part of the practice because a lot of our experiential learning is practicing for a real workplace. And so in our training, we were emphasizing that if you are going to an interview, these are some of the things that you will need to be looking for. What your background looks like, what they can hear when you come off of mute. Did you show up to the interview on time or did you show up to the interview late? They're still looking at that for your time management as well. And so as we transitioned it all in our spaces of thinking, we were like, okay, let's grow together. I've learned that, yes, I can wake up an hour later, but that doesn't mean that I can start an hour later for work. I have to still show up in the same way. And in a professional setting, because the line is really blurry for all of us, right? Everything is now in the same place. Your work, your home, your child care, your school, right? Parents were really navigating a lot of different spaces and our participants were experiencing the same exact thing. And so we worked together on that all together, and it really built community. It really was a space where we were able to have conversations about this difficult time, these difficult and new demands, and learning together how do we navigate it. We had new parents, right? And so that's also a challenge. And so that was how in this space we were able to start figuring out like, employers are looking for this and we're learning more. So let's bring this message back to our community. This is what we're hearing from employers. So this is the message that we're now going to share to our participants.
Yeah. And what I love here is hearing that, again, we're continuing to meet participants where they're at, right? And just, it's kind of like you acknowledge the uncertainty of the world of the pandemic. And again, let me tie it back to transformations, looking at it with new eyes, right? Again, like you said, maybe seeing someone like struggling to get their video on or dealing with some stuff in the house. And instead of maybe docking them for that or just, penalizing, it's like, how do we treat this conversation like a coachable moment, right? And again, you're being authentic, you're being relevant. You're like, hey, this is going on right now. Let's talk about what this could look like if you were working from home in the future, right? And again, a trainer being that both part student and part teacher. And you made a really great point too, I want to dig a little into, which is assessing, right? So again, Cara, whether you are working at Clean Slate or, exterior maintenance company, or whether you are in our workshop model or in the classic in-person, right? You're being assessed on the 5 workplace competencies, which you mentioned. So these are 5 specific skills, time management, conflict resolution, communication, 2 more, team building, and professionalism, right? So these are 5 things you're being assessed for, right? By all staff at all times, and you're working towards. Obviously, it looks a bit different, again, if you're not in person and you can't assess for that. So I'm curious to hear more from you about, as a trainer, what do these conversations look like in assessments, right? Like, it sounds like we've had to become more flexible in that or change the way we're assessing. And what does that look like behind the scenes? And what conversations are you having with other staff, whether it's recruitment or coaching, right? Who are maybe interacting with these people and seeing a different side of them that you're not, or vice versa.
So in person, we, because we were seeing participants every day, I believe we were just measuring differently based on the situation. I see you, we're in person. I can tell if you're late by visually being with you, or your communication, or I'm there to witness the conflict. And so we started to think outside the box and say, what are some ways that it show up? All of those 5 workplace competencies still show up in a virtual setting. And so now I'm calling you more, maybe, for example. Now I'm calling you a whole lot more, and I'm needing you to respond to me a whole lot more. So if we work in 2 different departments, or you work with, let's say you work at a bank and you are working closely with another bank, you're going to have a lot of phone conversations. You may never meet this one of your coworker, but you still have a responsibility and some accountability to that person. And so we start to look through that lens. And so, are you responding to the phone calls in 24 to 48 hours? Or are you checking your email as you already guaranteed that you would? Because a lot of jobs do contact directly through email first. Are you showing up to your resume appointments on time? Are you standing people up? And just for example, logging on and getting booted off from a space can be really frustrating.
Yeah.
Right. I've been in the space where I'm like, should I even show up? My I've been trying to get in for the last 15 minutes. Now I'm going to show up all late, and then I'm going to feel anxious about being late. And so participants are going through the exact same thinking. So they're like, well, forget it. I'm not going to do it. Or are you going to get in? Are you going to and be mad, right? Or whatever that frustration is, and hit that conflict head on. You're going to keep trying to get in. You're going to reach out to someone and say, hey, I'm going to be a little late. Or I'm trying to get in. I promise I've been trying to get in for a while. Yeah. You've called a few people on the hotline. You've done everything. And it's able to show, like, in that space, even though you were frustrated, even though everything was unexpected, you're still handling that conflict in a way, and you didn't really blow up. It also may be conversations. So before in person, we would have conversations that may really push a few buttons and people will respond. So we still get some of that in this virtual setting. What we've learned, a few nuances, is, again, because you're in your living room, people show a lot more emotion in this space. And so coaching through that and talking through that and getting participants to see, like, yes, you're at your home, but if you get a remote job, then you're technically not at home, even though you feel like you're at home. And so how do you divide the two where there's a very blurry line? And so when we started to think about how to look at competencies, it got really creative. But it was again taking that step back to say, like, what are we using more of that we didn't use a lot of before? And it was that virtual communication, those emails, those text messages. Are they appropriate, right? Are you appropriately communicating with the person and keeping it professional? Because again, now it's a text line, and so that kind of blurs a few lines. And so being able to save face, so to say, at all times, no matter what time it is of the day or who you're talking to. If I've never met you, I need to have that demeanor and be ready for anything that can happen.
For sure.
So it's been fun.
Yeah. And again, hearing that, I'm going to reference the transformations don't relax, right? Because it's one thing to be in class, seated on a chair, like on time. On the screen, we can see if you're dozing off, right? We can see if you have your phone down and you're texting, or if you're looking away. So you, again, don't relax. Like, you need to be on it. And you definitely mentioned teaching through a screen can be really freaking hard. One of the really cool things I learned from our affiliates at LSSI Works in Fort Wayne, Indiana, is I think they were teaching a class. Maybe it was on conflict management or something, but it was one of the classes where you got to really, rile the participants up. And again, in person, it's easier. So I think one of the things the trainers did was, like, she would ask a question and then maybe mute it, or the participant would speak through the screen and she would be like, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. And, obviously say it a couple of times to see how they'd respond, right? Are they going to hold themselves, or are they going to get angry? Are they going to blow up? So again, I think as trainers, we're finding unique and creative ways to provoke. And what I'm also hearing on the back end is we also need to be more flexible with how we're assessing for things virtually that we would have done in person, right? And also, like, how do you expect behavior change, right? Like maybe loosening up on that, because in person we give people a full week, right, to kind of show up, make the mistakes. We don't start docking people for like being tardy until week 2, right? So again, it sounds like maybe the way we're assessing or writing folks up has also shifted. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. So we wanted to think of that grace in the same way, because another benefit you get in person is you learn the culture because you're in it. You're learning what the Cara culture is. You also might have some advanced participants, which are participants that have already finished their 4 weeks of transformation workshop, and now they're there to kind of help guide and answer questions, and be that counterpart to look towards if you need some assistance. But not having that, we were like, they still deserve the same grace, right, to understand the culture. And so, for example, if you were late to a class or you were no call, no show before, that's automatic dismissal, or late to a class could be a write-up after that first week. And so in a way of mirroring it, we would now document it and call you. We give you a call and we'll say, hey, you signed up for this workshop. You didn't show and you didn't reach out to let anyone know. And then we started to relate that to the workspace. What happens in a workspace? If this was an interview, what's the next steps for you in this interview? And participants will talk it through, and they'd eventually come to the idea of, I wouldn't have that job or the opportunity anymore because I didn't talk it through with the person that I needed to talk it through. Or if this was at work, if you already had a job and it's happened, then what happens? Do you know who to even communicate? Maybe you did have the intentions to, but you didn't know who to reach out to, so you just kind of gave up, and then that's another conflict situation. Why did you give up? What happened there? Why didn't you give it a shot? And so they would have those one-on-one conversations. If it's in person and it's something that everyone could learn from, the conversation takes place right there in the workshop as it would in person, because everyone can learn from that one experience instead of having 4 or 5 people do the same thing again, and then having individual conversations where they can learn together and support each other through it, give each other different ideas on how to do it in the past. And so that was a little bit of how we were trying to navigate the same discipline and structure in a virtual setting. And so still bringing that community piece, still bringing that conversation piece, and letting participants know this is your journey. I'm on it with you, right? And I think over time, we learned a lot from what participants shared with us. And so that helped us then change some of the ways that we were looking at things and how to catch it before it happened, and kind of train it up front and maybe first impressions. So when we were talking about first impressions, instead of letting it happen, those are some of our examples.
Yeah.
So
for sure. And let's talk more about community, right? Again, during our classic model, right, you've got the same cohort of folks going through the same journey, right? And previous to the pandemic, we were running workshops, right? So those are like revolving rotational workshops on different topics that you can kind of pick and choose, create your own journey, right? Pick your own adventure of sorts. And once the pandemic hit, right, we slowly, after a couple months, started transitioning to in-person workshops. Obviously, you know, it wasn't a total hit overnight. Let's talk more about that. Like, did we have sold out workshops? What did that look like? And what were we learning, you know?
So we were so excited in the beginning. I remember this. We were talking about going in, and if anyone knows Jesse Timberball, he always dresses very well. And so he was like, I get to put on a suit again, suit, tie. And so he goes in and he's there, and no one showed up. So he had a moment where he was just like, you know, again, how do we get participants to want to show up in person? Because people are still nervous. There are people that want to get outside but aren't quite sure what that would look like. And so we became a lot more transparent about what our safety measures were, so participants could know that we were maxing out at 10 people, that we were making sure that all the chairs were 6 feet apart, front, back, and to the side, so you can choose where to sit. Masks were still required. We were still doing the temperature checks. I think that helped participants feel a little more comfortable and safe in the space. But that wasn't the only time he got his 0. Sometimes he'd get 1, and sometimes he'd fill up a classroom. But in those one-offs, he would talk about how it was a time to really teach and have a one-on-one conversation with a person and really, really talk some things through and slow it down a bit. And it paid off in the end. After having that engagement, that one-off, when you saw that participant next week, when there was an additional 3 or 4 participants in the workshop, he had another person to advocate with him. So everything that participant had brought from the week before with that one-on-one engagement, he or she is now like, yeah, because, right? And they're adding all the color to it. And they're also building community in that space now as well. They're taking the information that they've learned from that last week or weeks prior. They're passing it to their counterparts, and their counterparts are getting it from a person that's going through it with them, as well as getting it from a facilitator. And so they're getting two different perspectives, and they're building community, and they're now able to talk it through in their own personal experience and what's going on with them. And so that helped with the transformative piece too, because in the beginning we were like, one person.
Yeah.
What are we gonna do? But participants took the ropes, as participants normally do. They take the ropes, they go with the flow, and that was what we saw. They built their community, they came together, and we were like, oh, okay, one is good. One is good as 20, and so
yeah. That was and again, I reference us to share this story of maybe 0 people showing up to the class. Not to say it's a failure, but again, I'm going to reference that transformations is changing your behavior, right? If you show up and you see if you see something you don't like, we push participants to change your behavior to get a different result, right? Whether it's applying for jobs or getting a job. So in the same way, as trainers, we had to change our behavior to create a new space for folks to show up and maybe acknowledge, hey, we might just get 1 or 2 or 3 participants the first time around, and that's okay, because the next time we'll get more, right? And again, in this community that we're building, word of mouth makes a difference, and having internal ambassadors to pull folks in and to share and continue to nudge, like that's been a learning there. So I reference that to say, for any of our folks watching this right now who are trainers or really just trying to figure out how do I build community virtually or in person or hybrid, like it's okay. You're not going to get everyone through the door at the first time around. And that's not a failure, right? And if you're continuing to meet participants where they're at and just creating a space where they're ready to show up and show out, as we say, I think, yeah, if you build it, they will come. I sincerely believe in that. So I'm curious now, Joycee, what does the future of training look like, right? Folks are getting vaccinated. There's talks of return to campus. Are we going to go back to Cara Classic, this full-time model? Are we running workshops? I think folks are curious to hear where that is headed.
Mm-hmm. So in the hybrid space, because of that one class that we were having in person and then our online presence, we've learned that we were tapping into a population that we hadn't seen before, which were participants that were at work and they couldn't get off in enough time to get to a workshop on the South Side in the morning without missing a majority of it, by having to leave early maybe to get to their shift, or by the time they caught their bus and their train and they got to the second half, they've missed half of the workshop. So they were able to log into these virtual spaces while they were at work. They were able to plug in their earbuds and they were talking to their supervisors about moving up, learning new skills, and got approval. And so they were able to do it in this space. And if they were looking for a better job or promotion, they were able to now take on these trainings to do so. And so that really excited us. And we were like, we want that. We want more of that. We want to be able to continue to bring in these individuals that can do that. And so now the conversation is, what would that look like? What would a maybe virtual portal look like if we were going to do a virtual portal? Or do we do so many days are virtual and so many days are going to be in person? And so we're at the beginning of thinking of it, but we're taking in the information that participants are giving us about what they need, what they can commit to. We're also thinking of how to make sure that we're not leaving too many people out. And so talking together in different departments, what have they been seeing? And so if we do go in person, we're now saying, do we need to go to 5 o'clock? Or is it like a work day where sometimes you go to work and you have to stay and sweat it out until, long days. And sometimes you finish your task early, you got a little extra, you want to get a head start. And wondering about that self-care piece. Is that a time where everybody gets out at 3 o'clock so people can go back to taking care of themselves or taking care of what they need to and enjoying life while also building in their career? So we're not quite sure exactly what it's going to look like yet. It's really exciting as everyone's ideas are coming and experiences, and people are sharing out what that's been like. So soon we will find something. We're probably going to try a few things that won't work, but sure. we're really excited.
Yeah. And again, I know at least at Cara Plus, we are all in the spirit of try things out. I feel like the two words of the year are pivot and hybrid, right? Like try stuff out, go virtual, go hybrid, in person, virtual. So all for that spirit of experimentation and just continuing to bring job seekers in and acknowledge the shifting landscape. Like folks are learning how to do their jobs through a virtual space. Well, we're also learning how to train effectively virtually and in person, right? So yeah, hopefully we can engage you again in a future office hours in a few months to see how things are going in a shifted world. But thank you so much, Joycee.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'm going to wrap us up and pull up a final slide for you all. We hope that you found this to be a meaningful space to pull up and connect. Again, I'm hosting these monthly office hours on different topics. So if you're curious about topics around the work we're doing with digital equity, potentially around our social enterprises, how we're doing recruitment, please do visit caraplus.org, and we'll have future offering signups in the months to come. I'm now sharing a slide of our virtual institute, which is our full deep dive into our service delivery model. So again, today we really touched base on training, but every quarter I offer a cohort-based experience for practitioners to really pull up and to unpack the tools that work in workforce development. So we walk you through recruitment, training, coaching, placement, and everything in between. So if you're curious to learn more about that or share this information with your staff, again, feel free to visit caraplus.org, and we would love to engage with you. So thank you so much to all of you chiming in. Thank you, Joycee, for making time, for kind of testing this out with me. And I appreciate you guys so much, and we will definitely talk soon.